So, not long ago, Konstantin Kisin of Triggernometry gave a speech at the Oxford Union. That is a speech and debate society at Oxford University. He railed against wokeness. A lot of people, both present and online, were very impressed. I was not. I think it betrayed him to be something of a demagogue, certainly not a deep thinker. I'm not saying everything he's ever said is stupid, but this was a real disappointment, and I'm going to explain why. It's not a long video. We're going to look at everything except for the first 2 minutes. Those are just some shibboleths railing against wokeness, defending Western civilization and so forth. Agree with that or not, nothing really new there. Let's have a look at the interesting part.
Now, I want to talk to those of you who are woke and who are open to rational argument. A small minority, I accept. Because one of the tenets of wokeness is, of course, that your feelings matter more than the truth. But I believe in you. I believe there are those of you here who are woke, who are open to rational argument, so let me make one. We are told that your generation cares more than any other about one issue in particular, and that issue is climate change. We're told that many of you suffer from climate anxiety. You wish to save the planet. And for tonight, and tonight only, I will join you. I will join you in worshipping at the feet of Saint Greta of climate change. Let us all accept right here, right now, that we are living through a climate emergency and our stocks of polar bears are running extremely low. I join you in this view. I truly do. Now,
so let's start by observing how disingenuous he is. He scolds the woke for placing their feelings over facts. And yet, he does the very same thing when he tries to set the tone for his speech by generating this negative emotional reaction to Greta Thunberg. He's not criticizing something she said specifically, something she did. He's just going, hey, you environmentalists, you're a bunch of zealots, and Greta's your cult leader. Well, you know, you can always characterize your political adversaries in those terms. It's utterly unfalsifiable. If your objective is truly to place feelings over facts, then that certainly doesn't help. The other big indication of his disingenuousness is the suggestion that climate change activism is just about saving a few polar bears. Obviously, it's not. It's about a lot more consequences, far more disastrous than just that. Now, he started his speech by telling his audience that he is going to concede the climate change premises. He's out there, he's thumping his chest, he's saying, hey, you wokesters, I can grant all your starting assumptions and still persuade you of my position. But he doesn't really do that, because one of the first things he does is he trivializes the climate change concern as being just about polar bears. Now, you might say, hey, he's a comedian, he's trying to be funny, he doesn't have to be perfectly consistent, don't take it too seriously. Well, fair enough, but he is before the Oxford Union. So I think the comedy should take a back seat. Number two, I could forgive that if the comedy were truly funny. I would say we could sacrifice a little intellectual honesty to a lot of humor if the humor is there. But alas, it is not. This trope of environmentalism as being about some sentimental attachment to owls or polar bears and no more is pretty hackneyed. It's pretty old, so there's nothing funny there. So I don't forgive the contradiction because there's no real joke there. And third, as we're going to see further down the video, he really is disingenuous. It's not just a joke. He promises to concede the climate change hypothesis for purposes of this argument, but he doesn't really do that. Okay, let's move on.
Now, what are we to do about this huge problem facing humanity? What can we in Britain do? We can only do one thing. You know why? This country is responsible for 2% of global carbon emissions, which means that if Britain was to sink into the sea right now, it would make absolutely no difference to the issue of climate change. You know why? Because the future of the climate is going to be decided in Asia and in Latin America, by poor people who couldn't give a shit about saving the planet. No, thank you. No, thank you. It's going to be decided by poor people in Asia and Latin America who don't care about saving the planet. You know why? Because they're poor. Because they're poor. I come from Russia, which is not a poor country, it's a middle-income country. 20% of households in Russia do not have an indoor toilet. What they have is an outdoor toilet. And I don't mean one of those nice portaloos that we get here. I don't even mean a Glastonbury portaloo. I mean a wooden shack with a hole in the ground that holds a collected fermented memory of the last 10,000 visits. How many of you are going to go home tonight and say, let's rip out our bathroom and erect a Siberian shithouse in the back garden? And if you're not, why should they?
So, yes, it is true that richer developed countries like Britain don't emit that many greenhouse gases relative to poorer ones. And that's for the simple reason that the manufacturing is located in the developing world. But that hardly means richer countries aren't implicated. Who owns those factories? Who's placing orders at those factories? Whose consumers are buying those products? The answer is disproportionately people in the richer developed world. So the fact that the factories are located elsewhere hardly means that British people and others like them are not implicated. That is pure nonsense. The other piece of pure nonsense in this segment is this idea that the future of climate change policy is going to be decided by poor people. Poor people in the global south. I have news for Kissin. Poor people do not decide policy wherever they happen to be, even where they happen to be the great majority. The Oxford Union has invited him to give this prestigious speech, so I assume they think he's brilliant. But from what I've seen in this video, here is someone who doesn't have a basic understanding of how the world works. So maybe the value of an Oxford degree is not quite what it used to be. The other evidence of that is his concern about the lack of indoor toilets in lower and middle income countries. What that has to do with climate change, I have no idea. I have not heard anyone argue that indoor toilets or indoor plumbing generally is a major source of climate change and that it therefore needs to be reduced. I have not heard anyone arguing that because of climate change, we need to prevent people in poorer countries from installing indoor toilets, but let developed countries do whatever they want. If this evil organization does indeed exist out there, then certainly I join Kissin in opposing it. But I have not heard of that. And so, once again, it reinforces my perception that he has no understanding of what's going on in the real world. This thing about toilets, if you're into scatological humor, and I don't judge, then maybe it's not bad. But there's really nothing else going on there. Let's see some more.
120 million people in China do not have enough food. I don't mean that they don't get dessert. I mean they suffer from malnutrition. That means that their immune system is breaking down because they don't have enough food. You're not going to get them to stay poor. Imagine you're Xi Jinping, the leader of China. When you were 10 years old, there was a revolution, a cultural revolution in your country, and people came and they put your father in prison. Your mother had to denounce him. Your sister killed herself. And you, no longer enjoying the protection of your formerly powerful father, were sent to a village where you lived in a cave house. And here you are, decades later. You have clawed your way up the bloody and greasy pole of Chinese politics to be the undisputed supreme leader of the very Communist Party that destroyed your family. And you know that the main thing you have to do to survive and to stay in power is to deliver the one thing that the people of China want: prosperity, economic growth. Where do you think climate change ranks on Xi Jinping's list of priorities? A third of all children who live in extreme poverty in the world live in India. That means they are starving and dying of preventable disease. Now, about 15 months ago, my wife got pregnant. Not me, because we're old school. And for 9 months, we talked about what our boy would look like, what he might do when he grows up. We looked at baby scans and videos on YouTube about what the fetus looks like at 9 months and 12 months and 20 months. And eventually he was born. And he is this cute little bundle of joy. He's cuter than about 80% of puppies. Right. Now, if you said to me that I had a choice, either my son had a serious risk of starving or dying from a preventable disease in the next year, or I could press a button and he would live. He would go to school. He would bring his first girlfriend home. He'd go to university and graduate and become a woke idiot. And then he'd get a job and get married and have children and become a man. But all I have to do is press this button. And for every day of my son's life, a giant plume of CO2 is going to get released into the atmosphere. Now, you're all very young, and most of you are not parents. Let me tell you something. There is not a parent in the world who would not smash that button so hard their hand bled.
So, once more, I am not persuaded that Konstantin Kisin lives in the real world. Last summer, you had record heat waves in China, which led to record droughts. That led to disruptions in the harvest, disruptions in hydroelectric power generation, which in turn led to blackouts and manufacturing disruptions. I think poor Chinese people care about those things. Also last summer, a third of Pakistan underwater because of melting Himalayan glaciers caused by climate change. You've got rapidly expanding deserts in Central Asia, wreaking all kinds of problems. Syrian civil war, in part precipitated by climate change. Drought leading to crop failures, leading to riots, etc. You have got Pacific islands that are being swallowed up by the Pacific Ocean and will be uninhabitable in decades, either because their coastline is swallowed up or because their sources of fresh water are being contaminated. So this suggestion that poor people don't have a real stake in climate change, that it is simply some sort of niche Western elite obsession, is 180 degrees false. If anything, it is poor people who get hit a lot harder. Now, of course, I understand there are going to be some climate change denialists out there who are going to say that this rapid confluence of rare weather events is one big coincidence. Well, that's a debate for another day. Because as I highlighted, Kissin has conceded the climate change hypothesis. He has said that for purposes of this argument, he's going to grant the assumptions. But as I said before, he doesn't really do that. For him, climate change, it's just, as he said, this plume of CO2 and nothing else. Not the consequences of that plume of CO2. So he is a dishonest actor. And we're going to see that again in the next clip.
You are not going to get these people to stay poor. You're not even going to get them to not want to be richer. And so, I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, there is only one thing we can do in this country to stop climate change. And that is to make scientific and technological breakthroughs that will create the clean energy that is not only clean, but also cheap. And no, thank you. And the only, I want everyone to get home on time today, which is not going to happen. And the only thing that wokeness has to offer in exchange is to brainwash bright young minds like you to believe that you are victims, to believe that you have no agency, to believe that what you must do to improve the world is to complain, is to protest, is to throw soup on paintings. And we on this side of the house are not on this side of the house because we do not wish to improve the world. We sit on this side of the house because we know that the way to improve the world is to work, is to create, it is to build. And the problem with woke culture is that it's trained too many young minds like yours to forget about that. Thank you very much.
So in all this, Kissin has made 2 points that have a grain of truth. The first is that, yeah, if you're worried about keeping your stomach full, if you're living hand to mouth, you're probably not going to worry too much about climate change. That is a psychologically true observation. But so what? If you're starving, there's a lot of things you're not going to think about. That doesn't mean those things aren't important. That doesn't mean the government doesn't need to worry about them. That doesn't mean they're not going to ultimately determine whether you starve or not, as in the droughts and harvest failures caused by climate change. So, again, what happened to placing feelings over facts? The second true point is that, yes, people in the poor developing world want to improve their quality of life. You can't just tell them, you've got to make do with less, or even just make do with what you have. Fair enough, but people are thinking about those problems. There are people in universities, in think tanks, elsewhere, NGOs, who are trying to deal with that. So it's hardly an incisive point, and I don't think Kissin has anything to contribute to it. So in all this, he has made 2 points that are kind of true, but also kind of uninteresting. And in the process, he has used those grains of truth as cover to incorporate all the BS which we've been observing. And the worst of it is his final message. Don't complain, don't protest, don't throw soup at paintings. If you want to help the environment, just work on technological solutions. The throwing soup at paintings is a reference to an event last summer. There were some climate change activists who went into a London art museum and threw some soup at a Van Gogh. And presumably the message was, well, what do you care more about, this painting or climate change and all its consequences? The Van Gogh was not actually harmed. It was protected by a pane of glass. But I agree they should not have done that. That form of protest is certainly, it's pretentious, it's overwrought, it's ineffective. And for the same reason, I would likewise condemn climate change protest by blocking traffic to prevent people from using their gas-guzzling engines. But Kissin is placing that sort of thing in the same category as protesting, complaining generally. He says it's protesting, complaining, throwing soup at paintings. Well, complaining and protesting are things that people do in democracies. And I don't see why free speech is that important if complaining and protesting aren't. So I certainly detect a certain authoritarian streak in Kissin. And this other idea that, well, unless you want to go study STEM and come up with some sort of technical solution, just shut up about it. Well, if you have that expertise and interest, that's great. But of course, whether the funding is there for the relevant research, for the relevant products, that is a function of public sentiment, which is in turn a function of protesting and complaining. For all practical purposes, Kissin is a climate change denier. He may not directly deny it, but he's saying that even if it's real, what really matters are not the catastrophic effects of climate change. It's that there may be some possibly immature people out there who are deriving an undue, unearned sense of self-importance from their climate activism. That's the real problem. So, here, as before, It is Kissin who's placing feelings over facts. He is saying that his feelings of irritation at what he perceives to be Greta Thunberg's unearned, undue sense of self-importance is more important than the fact of climate change. He's placing feelings over facts, not anyone else. Now, I'm not saying he's wrong. Maybe there's some climate change activists out there who indeed are unduly self-righteous. But of what importance could that possibly be compared to the actual consequences of climate change? This idea that placing feelings over facts is some special feature of wokeness is positively ridiculous. Philosophers have known for millennia that people tend to place feelings over facts. Neuroscientists have known it for decades. When your worldview gets affirmed, you get a dopamine hit. You like it. That's why you don't want to acknowledge facts, perspectives that don't cohere with your worldview. That's just the human brain. It's not wokeness. And another real problem I have is this very expansive definition of wokeness. In fact, I don't really know what definition he's operating with, because I don't see what wokeness has to do with environmentalism. Whatever wokeness is exactly, it has something to do with the level of deference which society owes to certain identities. That's a bland but hopefully neutral description. I don't see what that has to do with wanting to avert catastrophic droughts and floods and forest fires. It seems to me that you should oppose these things. You should want to prevent these things wherever you are on the political spectrum. So, at the hands of Kissin, wokeness just means anything a conservative might be opposed to. So that is hardly a productive use of language. And that is just one disappointment among the many that I've described to you here. So in some, very disappointing performance at the Oxford Union, but let me know what you think in the comments. If Kissin is brilliant and I'm the dummy, let me know why. And of course, please like and subscribe. Help me grow this channel. I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.